All right, guys. So, welcome to another little quick segment. So, today we're going to be talking about Sonos. So, if you haven't heard of Sonos, I don't know where you've been at, but Sonos is a very, very popular. Um, you could call it a audio streamer solution or IP audio solution for your home. There's different types, right? There's sound bars, there's amplifiers, they call them a Sonos port, which could feed, for example, another amplifier. If you have a third-party amplifier, which you already have your speakers connected to, then you could use a Sonos port to then add on via digital connection or also an analog connection over to an amplifier or a pair of speakers, power speakers, etc., etc. So one of the most known issues with Sonos is the network in your house. Remember, Sonos uses your internet for everything, right? To connect it online. Remember, Sonos does not have Bluetooth. It does have AirPlay. A couple years ago, when the new line of S2 products, which are known, which one of the biggest features that was released was the Sonos AirPlay feature. It also has the Spotify Connect. Now, Spotify Connect was also available during the S1 products, but eventually everyone demanded for AirPlay since everyone has an iPhone, or majority of the individuals have iPhones. So AirPlay was a big feature that everyone was asking for. There was another product name, also a product known as Autonomic, that released this feature way before Sonos did. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but if I am understanding, based on my timeline, that's what it was. But anyways, going to Sonos, welcome to the Sonos website as you see it here, and we can see all kinds of stuff. So let's kind of dive in first to a little bit of the couple products that we could see right off the back. Sonos will be having Black Friday sales, pretty much on any retail store that you could think of. I believe they might have some Black Friday stuff on their website. It hasn't been released hasn't been told, at least that I know of. So we shall see. Most of I think the Black Friday stuff on the website would possibly be like refurbished product, etc., etc. But yeah, you have and we're going to be talking about all the S2 products here. So I'm not going to be covering any of the S1 products as that ship has sailed. So we have the Arc Ultra, which is a sound bar that could be either mounted on or surface mounted on a furniture, or also could be mounted. Now the mount does not come with the sound bar, so it is a feature. It is an accessory that you would have to buy, unfortunately. There's also the Sonos Ace, which I don't know what Apple is doing. I think a very long time Sonos should have bought, or I mean Apple should have acquired Sonos, but I know Sonos wants to do its own thing. So, but yeah, we have the Sonos Ace. We have the Roam 2 now. This was really nice. The only downside is, let me see. You know what? Let's actually go through. I haven't really ventured this in too much. It does have Bluetooth. So I think it's one of the few products that does have Bluetooth. We might actually look at and see what we could do. We do have the soundbar, and they also have their very, very interesting soundbar. I mean, subwoofer. Subwoofer is probably for what the product offers. I think it's a great subwoofer. We're not going to dive into that since we're going to be talking more on the challenges of Sonos on the network, but let's just kind of dive into here. What else do they offer here? Yeah, they do have the personal beam, or your sound, which is the other sound bar. But yeah, they have all kinds of stuff. You have your plays. Do they even call it their plays still? There we go. Sound bars. Anyways, okay, so Sonos is a very known product, has been heavily marketed. You pretty much could find it anywhere: Best Buy, Walmart, Target, etc., 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 Amazon, and of course you could find your good old knockoffs on Temu, right, or Alibaba and all this stuff. But anyway, so Sonos at the end of the day, it's probably the number one most requested product across. Now, since myself, I am in home automation, it's probably the most requested product to be used in their home. The only downside is, as of right now, and this is confirmed from Sonos Tech support, the last conversation I ever had, if you are going to be doing more than 6 Sonos products throughout the house, that's where things get very interesting. Very similar to what Apple HomeKit does with their whole upgraded architecture and all this stuff. Remember, Apple likes using the big words, but we're going to be diving into a couple of the issues that a lot of people have, and how can you overcome that, right? So let's go into Google real quick, and let's look at a Sonos amp. So let's just look at what we have in the back here. So the Sonos amp. Let me see if I could just download this. No, actually not. Oh yeah, though you could just go in here, huh? All right, let's see. Can we zoom into this? I guess I'll zoom in like this. All right. So the Sonos, behind the Sonos, and I'm gonna be taking this a little bit more of the technical aspect. So sorry for any new individuals that want to just kind of follow along here. So for the Sonos, we do have an HDMI port. A lot of people say, well, what's the HDMI port? So the HDMI port obviously is going to be for your HDMI ARC or audio return channel. That's going to be for something if you're going to be using the TV's applications, the smart features. You could connect to the Sonos amp. This particular product, you do have your left and your right analog connections, or your banana plugs here, which are going to be for your speakers. This is going to be something if you're going to be doing some bookshelves or some tower speakers. Now, I believe, I'm not sure if it's 100 or 75 watts per channel there. Let me just go ahead and turn off the music because it's going to get a little distracting here. But anyway, but yeah, for example, if you have some bookshelf speakers or some passive speakers that you want to connect using Sonos, and you have your TV, and you're going to be using your smart features, you could go ahead and connect that HDMI port over to the Sonos HDMI port here. This is also available on the Sonos ARC. But pretty much all of the soundbars. So if you have a soundbar, you'll have the HDMI, and that's how you're going to be getting your audio return over to your Sonos product. Now, you do have 2 RJ45 connections here, or your Ethernet ports. They both do the same thing, right? You could either connect to if you're going to be hardwiring your Sonos product, then you could either connect it to either port 1 or port 2. That is just to give it internet. The Sonos also does have Wi-Fi. If you're going to be doing one product, I usually recommend, if you have the ability to hardwire your product, then by all means go ahead and do that. But over the Wi-Fi, I think if you do have a strong internet or Wi-Fi connection, there shouldn't be any issues whatsoever. And this is from a total amount of products from 1 through 5. Hardwire them all. If you want to do Wi-Fi, then cool. Now, the reason there are 2 Ethernet ports. So, for example, if you're going to be having multiple of these Sonos amps, say centralized in a location, then, for example, if you are limited to how many Ethernet ports you have either on your switch or on your router, then keep in mind you could daisy chain these guys. That's the idea, right? Sonos does have some routing capabilities, so it's able to create that Sonos network, which Sonos calls, and it's able to go ahead and connect them daisy chain so that the main feed from your switch, your network switch, or your router connects to one of these guys, and then from there you could go ahead and daisy chain one after the other. And remember, the goal is 5. You could technically get it up to 6, but after you move on to more than 6 products, and that's where you have a little bit that's where we're going to be diving into. You do have your RCA or your analog inputs. You're in here. You do for the Sonos amp, you can also connect a power amp, or for example, if you have a passive subwoofer and you have a third-party amplifier, then that will be your sub pre-out. But so that is all the connections there. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's what I call 6 there. But as far as inputs, you could either, for example, if you have a turntable, a CD player, a tape player, you never know. And if you want to feed that audio over to the Sonos ecosystem, then that's what the analogs will be for. So, okay. So, man, there we go. So before we move on, we're going to be talking a little bit of what the OSI model is. And this is for networking, okay? There are a total of 7 layers. Some individuals might say there's an 8th layer. There are things that we could dive into, but we're going to be talking about the first 7 layers here. So I would say 99% of everything is going to happen on the transport layer. Right, so whenever you're accessing www.google.com or you're accessing your network switch or your router, all of your universal or your URL, then that happens there. Now, a couple of things which is also known as your unicast. So unicast is pretty much the network that we all know of, right? It's your basic network. As you're traveling around, you're going through surfing the web, or you're accessing any web interfaces for any devices, then that is your unicast, right? IPv4. Well, not necessarily IPv4, but at the end of the day is pretty much the basic layer on the network that will, at least in my own words, is that basic layer that everyone knows what a network is, and so nothing to be complicated there. Now, Sonos, one of the things that why I wanted to talk about the issue that we're having with a lot of people. Let's go back here, right? So earlier I mentioned the Sonos network. So very similar to Apple with your Bonjour or your MDNS. There is a separate layer within networking, also known as multicast, right? Multicast exists on the IPv4 side and also on the IPv6. On the IPv4 is known as IGMP snooping. On the IPv6 is your MLD snooping. So Sonos, right? Once you start having 1 product, 2 product, 3 product, 4, or your 5th and your 6th, once you start grouping everything that happens inside your Sonos product, one of the things that happens is that Sonos will be using that next layer away from unicast. Now that will depend on your network setup, right? So if you have your basic router, you have your basic mesh network, depends on the mesh network. But if you have your basic flat network, no VLANs, nothing set up, you got your Spectrum modem router, your Frontier, or whoever your ISP is, one of the things is going to happen is that all the traffic within Sonos is going to be handled at the unicast level. Even though that Sonos uses multicast to do all the grouping. So for example, if you have total of 6 products and you're going to go ahead and cast over music to, or group music to all 6 zones, then Sonos is going to be using that is going to want to use that multicast layer, right, in order to then create those sessions so that all of the products will come together. In a basic network, at the end of the day, that traffic that's going to be traveling through your network is going to be converted into unicast, right? It might start at a multicast level at the Sonos product, but as soon as they exit that product and it goes through the network, then at that point you're going to go ahead and see that it's going to go ahead and convert over to unicast. Now, where does this get a little tricky, right? So the moment you start introducing your 7th, 8, 9, 10, or as many Sonos products that your networker handle, this is where it's gonna really take hold, a toll on your network as far as how much it can handle. If you have your basic Spectrum router or your ISP modem router, one of the things that you're gonna start having is network loops. So what's gonna happen is that something that is not really talked about, that Sonos will not tell you, and it's something that we all learned the hard way, is that other than your network, remember Sonos products could be connected via Wi-Fi or hardline. The only thing is that if you're going to be hardwiring your product, you do have to go into your app, your Sonos app, and make sure that you turn off Wi-Fi on that product. The only issue, or the reason why you want to do that, is because even though your product is hardwired, what's going to end up happening is that the Wi-Fi is still going to be turned on, and if Sonos products are near each other, they will be talking over the network also through their own Wi-Fi, because Sonos, what they do is that they do create their Sonos network. So for example, let's just say we have those 6 products all close together, and let's just say that every single product is hardwired individually, not in a daisy chain method. Then what's going to happen is that as soon as you start grouping and everything, all the Sonos products, because they're in close proximity, they're going to go ahead and connect each other and want to talk with them within the Sonos network. So what happens is that once you start introducing more than 6 products, then there's going to be a lot of traffic that is going to, if there's going to be a lot of issues with the unicast, and the Sonos is going to want to go ahead and start transporting all that data over their Sonos network, which is where the network loops start to happen. And some people believe that that is not true. Some people say that, oh, that's a myth. If you do call Sonos, they might also tell you that it's not true. But keep in mind, I do this for a living. There has been times where it doesn't happen. I could go ahead and just connect all the Sonos. Everything's good to go. Network is a basic network, and everything's fine. But there are times that if the user is a heavy user, you'll start to notice that after a while, depending on the router that they have, you'll start to see that the performance on the network start to degrade, and that's when you're going to start having issues. A couple issues that you will come across is on your regular usage on other products, you're going to start to see that there's going to be timeouts on when loading web pages. You're going to be having issues with Wi-Fi calling. Just in general, you'll start to see you're going to be watching something on an Apple TV or on a smart TV. You're going to start to see that it might start giving you the little wheel of death. It's going to be buffering, and you're just going to be like, what is going on? And so what's happening on the back end is that there's going to be all this transport on the Sonos network, and at that point what's going to happen too is that there's also going to be traffic on your regular network. And so for example, we're going to go ahead and choose one product, Sonos number 1 and Sonos number 2. And so what's going to happen is if Sonos number 1 is talking to Sonos number 2 on your regular network, that is not there's no issue there. If Sonos number 1 and Sonos number 2 is talking within the Sonos network, no issue there. But what's going to happen is, for example, if there are any type of communication between Sonos 1 and 2 on your normal network, and then from there there's also communication at the same time within Sonos network, then at this so now both of them are having communication back and forth, and so the idea for the idea for the communication to happen is to make sure that they're going back and forth between each other. But what's going to happen is, for example, if Sonos number 1 is talking to Sonos number 2 on the Sonos network, then, for example, if there's any issues, any interference, Sonos number two is going to want to communicate back to Sonos number one on the Sonos network. But if there's any issues, it's going to want to go ahead and talk through the normal network. And so maybe having two products is not a big of an issue, but once you start having more than six products, you're going to start to have multiple communication moving back and forth. And so eventually, for example, now you're going to have communication running through the main network, communication happening on the Sonos network. And so if there's any issues, you're going to start to get a lot of communication running through back within the network. And so eventually you're going to start having the quick loop, right? The loop. And if it's your very first time handling that, a lot of the times it's very difficult to diagnose. As long as you are a network engineer, or you do have some what do you call it? If you do have some experience with maybe packet filtering with Wireshark or anything like that to diagnose a network, then you're going to be able to find that. But other than that, if you're just kind of sitting there with your phone, open up the Sonos app and you're having issues, some of the products don't want to group, your home network in general, you're trying to surf the web, you're trying to send an email, you're trying to do a Wi-Fi call, and you're having issues. And so at that point, you're like, you know what, let me start disconnecting the Sonos. And you start noticing that as soon as you start disconnecting the Sonos, so once you start having all the issues with the Sonos there, and you start disconnecting them, then at that point you're gonna start to see that network starts to fix itself. It starts to heal itself, and so you get to a point where you're just like, okay, let me start connecting them back again. And at first you might be fine, but after a while, you're going to start to see that more and more you're going to start having those issues, and you're just going to be scratching your head, pulling your hair, and you're going to tell yourself, what the hell is going on, right? And so this is where a couple of things that we need to discuss. Number one, if your Sonos is going to be hardwired, please turn off Wi-Fi on the product. This is available through the Sonos app. All you have to do is just shut it off, right? If you're going to be daisy chaining on your Sonos products, the goal is, if you're going to connect one Sonos to, say, a network switch or the router, go ahead and just connect one Sonos and daisy chain them together. But do not forget to turn off Wi-Fi on the products individually. If you leave them on, you're going to be having issues. If you're only going to hardwire one, which Sonos recommends if you're going to have more than 6 products, then you could leave the other ones on Wi-Fi. Simple, right? Now, you do this, you're living with Sonos, everything's great, everything's cool, but then you're going to come across an issue where you're going to tell yourself, well, it's still happening. You're going back and forth, you're hardwiring them, you're removing them, you're daisy chaining them, and then you're still having that issue. And you tell yourself, what is going on? What is going on? And so it gets to a point where you're going to be spending hours and hours and hours with Sonos Tech. You might be calling some of your buddies that have probably had this issue before or whatever. But there is somewhat of a solution. Okay? So, solution number one. If you have an ISP modem router, right, and maybe you have limited access to it. If you have Spectrum, you have no access to it. You have access through the Spectrum app, but other than that, pretty much no access to it. Frontier, depending, if you end up getting with Euro as your Wi-Fi, you might be okay. And the reason is for the Euro products, or your Euro, if you have more than one Euro across your house to extend your Wi-Fi, then keep in mind Euro is mesh network. Mesh network solution does have a lot of different abilities than your normal traditional robust non-mesh networks. I'm not going to get into the mesh networks. I think we could talk about mesh networks in a different live. Or I could go ahead and just kind of make a video and kind of explain the difference between both of them. There's there's a lot, but we're gonna move on to here. But anyway, so if you don't have access or easy access to your router to make any changes, then my biggest recommendation is just to leave all the Sonos on Wi-Fi. If you're gonna have more than 6 products, call me crazy. It, but remember, that's only if you do have a good Wi-Fi network throughout your house. If you don't have a good Wi-Fi network and you do have the ability or the infrastructure to hardwire them, then go ahead, but turn off Wi-Fi on the products. Now, let's say you do have access to your router. Maybe you hired an IT individual that's managing network, or you yourself are dealing, or you are the professional and you're trying to deal with this issue here. So we're going to dive into what I talked about earlier, which is multicast. Because Sonos uses multicast, you have to make sure that you enable multicast within your network. I don't care who you are. People could talk all smack here on this live, or they could post comments on this video. But at the end of the day, if you call Sonos, right? If you don't believe me, if you call Sonos and you tell them, hey, I have a total of 7, 8, whatever, how many products you have of Sonos, and you're having network issues, they might talk to you about all different things that you could do, but eventually they're gonna come across and say, hey, you know what? Do you have access to your router? And you might ask yourself, well, yes. And if you do, they will tell you to turn on multicast, and that is because if there are a lot of traffic on the Sonos within your network, then you, at the end of the day, you will not, and I mean, you would not be able to manage the network within Unicast. I'm sorry, that is just me, my experience, and this is me telling you that there's just no way that you could do that. So this is where we get into what is IGMP snooping. So most routers out there, you are able to go into your web interface, log in. You're able to go into potentially it's going to be under switching, potentially under the firewall or somewhere around there, and you're able to go ahead and turn on the Internet Group Management Protocol. So this is going to be that next layer that I was talking about, right? And so instead of having all this conversion from multicast to unicast happening on the network, then one of the things that we could do is now separate that. Avoid the router or your network from trying to convert that communication, and go ahead and now separate that completely. And so in order to do that, you have to now turn on IGMP snooping on your if it's either going to be on your router, if that's all you have, or if you have a managed switch like I do, then you could go ahead and turn on your multicast. So here, let's see, let's go ahead and log into my Netgear managed switch. And let's go ahead and kind of look into what we got to play here. So this is going to be the Netgear 48 port. Also known as your GS752 TPP. It is a enterprise level switch, or also a layer 3 switch. All layer 2 managed switches should have this ability too. So for layer 3 switches, keep in mind layer 3 switches can also be used as routers. So that's why I'm able to toggle between if I'm going to go into routing or switching. If it's going to be just a regular layer 2 switch or your router, but in this case we're just going to go into your regular switch here, then go over to your, it might be under advanced for different products, for different switches, but for in my case here we have under switching, and then you're going to have multicast. So a couple things here on multicast. Where are you? Okay. So the first thing you want to do is go ahead and turn on your multicast and enable it, right? Simple as that. As soon as you enable it, I'm not gonna enable it right now. It's just I don't have any Sonos products here currently on the network, so I don't need any multicast at the moment. But once you go ahead and enable it, one of the things that you are also gonna want to do is, where are you at? There you go. So once you enable IGMP snooping on your router or your switch, that's pretty much it, right? For usually on the router, some routers might call it multicast forwarding or IGMP forwarding, and you're pretty much done there. And something different on a switch is that once you enable it, you're just telling the switch, hey, I'm enabling the protocol. Nothing has happened there. The next thing you want to do is now go ahead and enable IGMP snooping on a VLAN. If you have a flat network, that 99% of the chances is going to be your VLAN 1. You want to go ahead and now enable IGMP snooping on your VLAN. Once you do that, now multicast is enabled within that layer or your VLAN. And so the next thing you want to do is go ahead and turn on your courier. So this could get a little controversial on maybe turning it on or maybe not. Yeah, I think from my understanding, it comes down to two different things. Do you want multicast to be controlled or managed on the device level, or do you want the switch to go ahead and manage that? If you want your switch to manage that, then you want to turn on your courier. So this is so at that point, the switch is not going to go ahead and look at all the multicast traffic. It's going to look at all the groups, and it's going to be able to now make sure that it's able to give them timestamps in order for them to stay live, or your TTL times. If you want your devices to control the multicast, then you don't need to turn on the courier. If you have more than 2 switches on your network and they are managed, then keep in mind to only turn on the courier on your primary switch. Do not turn them on 2. Because what's going to end up happening is that then you're going to start to have some type of, well, you're going to have multicast conflict. If you do turn on the courier on both switches, then the switch with the lowest IP number at the end, for my switch is 1.10. So, for example, your other switch is on a 1.11, then if the switches are the same, most of the time, if you're mixing and matching managed switches, the courier is always going to go ahead, or the switch is always going to select the switch with the lowest IP number. So for example, if you have, let's just say I have both switches here on 1.10 and 1.11, and you turned on courier on both, but you think that 1.11 is your primary switch, right? Because that's how you have it wired on the network. Then what's going to happen is that you think that's the primary switch, but at the end of the day, the switch is going to go ahead and select the switch with the lowest IP number and elect that as the courier. Now, as far as if you're going to be doing other stuff on the network other than Sonos, or you're going to kind of get into a little bit more in depth of and try to handle multicast, maybe do some simp or SIP traffic, or you're going to be doing audio over IP, then at that point you could start kind of manipulating a little bit of the robustness of the multicast. But in today's video, we're not going to really dive into that. We're just going to go ahead and enable multicast. So now, by what we just did there, is that we now have the network. We have now the network in a kind of in a separate state, right? We have unicast happening on the network, and then we also have multicast now. So whenever there is multicast traffic with the network, then you're gonna now have that separation. So and that conversion should not happen. Now the question is, will the conversion happen? Maybe from time to time it might, but at the end of the day, It shouldn't happen, but it could happen. It might happen if there are any type of maybe congestion in the network, or there's going to be some type of packet collision. Then at that point, there could be some type of conversion still happening between both of them, right? But that's pretty much it. Turn on multicast in the network. Let it do its thing. Now, if you want to set up some static routes, then by all means, go ahead and do that. For example, if you have one of the Sonos products connected to, say, port 5 on the switch, and say the rest of them are now daisy chained, then you could go ahead and now trigger that static route for port 5. What's nice is that at that point, you're pretty much telling the switch, hey, multicast is going to be is going to be viewed on this port. And so you're just kind of telling the switch, instead of the switch trying to decide, okay, I got port 5, I got port activity in port 10, port 11, there's multicast happening, and it's going to be switching back and forth. But if you have the ability to go ahead and set a static route, then 100% recommend it. Okay, so what happens now, right, George? I got multicast going. My issues are fixed. Okay. The answer is yes or no. The part on the yes is if all the Sonos products, right, are deployed. They're, say, one is hardwired and you're having daisy chain, Wi-Fi is off. I would say about 90% of the time you might be okay. Okay. Where it gets a little tricky on sometimes is depending on how well your managed switch is. But one of the things that I have seen multiple times is that, for example, you have your switch inside a cabinet, there's minimal airflow, and then at that point you're going to start to have an issue where it's overheating. I'm a big believer that if a switch starts to heat up and starts to get toasty, it will degrade the performance of it, right? And so that's something to look at. Another issue where you could have is within multicast is that, for example, if you have your Sonos, say you have one of them hardwired, which is 100% recommended, and all the other ones are Wi-Fi, what could end up happening at that point is that you're going to get a certain point where you might actually experience the same problem even if you didn't turn on multicast. And now you're going to tell myself, what? Then George, why did you tell me to turn on multicast then? Well, what ends up happening is that, for example, if a Sonos product starts to have issues, Sonos does participate in your ARP protocol, right? Or your ARP protocol, which is your auto resolute protocol, meaning that if, for example, Sonos number 1 and Sonos number 8 are having issues communicating each other, then either Sonos 1 or Sonos 8, depending on where you start your streaming from, it's going to go ahead and do an ARP broadcast in the network. So it's pretty much it's going to go ahead and tell the router, hey, send this message to the whole network. I am looking for Sonos number 1, right? And if you constantly start having that issue, then keep in mind your ARP tables on your managed switch are just going to fill up. You're going to have congestion in the network, and you're what we call a network storm. And so so now how do we fix that? This is where it could be a little tricky because it could be very different for various different scenarios. Textbook wise is you have to make sure your spanning tree on your managed switch is configured. But before we kind of get into that, let's say you don't have a managed switch. You turned on multicast within your router. Well, this is where you then tell yourself, why did I buy Sonos? Now, I like Sonos. Don't get me wrong. There's other solutions out there, right? If you have the ability to do an automation system, I always recommend going, for example, if you do Crestron, there's the NAX system, or if you have Savant, You have your Savant Music. So you do have your SIPAs versus the your DMs for Crestron. Um, they're a lot more robust than Sonos, but at the end of the day, Sonos has a built-in self-relieving system, and so if you just have a router and say you have 10 Sonos products in the network, you're just gonna be at a stage where you're gonna be rebooting them. You're gonna be rebooting your network. You're gonna be removing Sonos on your Sonos app. You're gonna be redeploying them, and unfortunately, that's just how it is. Um, but hey, you could go maybe a year. You can go 2 years and not have an issue. But overall, if you are the professional watching this right now, unfortunately, it's something that you would have to tell your client that, hey, it is Sonos. That's how Sonos is. So then a lot of clients will ask me, well, should I just buy new Sonos? Maybe the Sonos is bad. Nope. This is where, at the end of the day, I highly recommend upgrading your network. Get that managed switch, get that going, because at the end of the day, that's probably the best way to fix this. But that's going to be for Sonos right there, man. That's going to be for Sonos. Overall, it's a great product. It's nice. It sounds great. I mean, they claim now the S2, the new S2 products have lossless. That's gonna be interpreted based on what your ears can listen to. I don't think it really has high DACs within Sonos to be able to give you a high fidelity sound. But overall, if you have some great speakers, or if you're listening to Sonos, it's a great product. But overall, the network issues has, at the end of the day, comes down to the whole one. Just to recap here, number one, Sonos will create that Sonos network, right? They have that built-in router capabilities, so it's, if there's any issues, and it's gonna want to self heal itself, and so that's why it's using that Sonos network in order for them to talk to each other, to group each other, and all that. Two, Sonos does use multicast. If someone tells you Sonos doesn't do that, it's okay in unicast, believe them. But once you start having issues, at the end of the day, hey, Sonos uses multicast. So, how do we manage multicast? 100% recommend a managed switch. Go ahead and deploy your IGMP snooping. Manage that. If you have the ability to static route your multicast, then yeah. But overall, that's my take on Sonos. I come across this issue a lot of the times. But when in doubt, just reboot, right? But that's pretty much it, man. There's not too much on what we have here. So, I don't know. Yeah, there's a lot that we could dive into with Sonos, but that's pretty much the gist of it. Sonos has the Sonos network. Sonos communicates in multicast. And so if you're looking at where can I start at fixing in issues with the Sonos system, then I just kind of give you a little quick pointers on what to look at. It could be various scenarios on depending on the network you deployed and how and what topology you have. So at the end of the day, let's see what Sonos releases for Black Friday. And if you really love Sonos, don't forget to subscribe. Follow me on X. I will be posting this on YouTube, so stay tuned for a little bit more. This was a last minute thing. It's just that so many people have been asking me all these things about Sonos, and that's why I wanted to do this on the live. I might do a little shorter video on this and just kind of a little bit more organized, and we'll post it up there just because I see a lot of different videos on YouTube on this issue, but I just really want to nail it down. let them know. You know. So we shall see what we got to do. So with that, we're just gonna go ahead and call it a day.